All right there, everyone. Russia is building what they're calling a military church as a monument to their renewed commitment to Christian nationalist virtues. That is what we'll be talking about on today's video. Before we begin, I wanted to announce the grand opening of our brand new online store that has all kinds of gear and apparel celebrating all things nationalist, populist, and traditionalist. So click on the link below and have a look at our t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more, all featuring some of the key nationalist heroes from around the world. Let us know what you think of the store, and also if you'd like to see some items for sale that aren't already there, we'll be more than happy to make this your very own clearinghouse for all things nationalist, populist, and traditionalist. So enjoy. There is some really fascinating news coming out of Russia of late. It's been reported that the Russian military is in the process of finalizing plans to build what they're calling a military church to inspire and bolster the spiritual values of its armed forces. I'll put a link down below for you to see some of the pictures of what the church will look like. It's a very, very impressive building. I don't know if you caught it, but I put a picture of it as a thumbnail for this video. Plans are for it to be located in Patriot Park, just outside of Moscow, and construction will begin soon. And of course, the whole purpose of the church is to emblemize the patriotism, the love, and the devotion that the servicemen have for the renewed Holy Russia. From all reports, the church's architecture and design will hardly be subtle. The colors of the church will be those of the standard Russian missile system and armored vehicle. On the inside, the walls will be decorated with, battle scenes from military history. Again, I'll link the article below for your reference if you want some more information on this very, very fascinating subject and development. Now, of course, this move to build a military church, a church dedicated to Russia's armed forces, is really just another indicator that the world is, in fact, becoming more and more religious and indeed more and more religiously conservative. It's all part of the new conservative age rising that we've dedicated this channel to analyzing each and every day. And this would be an example of what scholars call retraditionalization, which is an indispensable part of this revitalization of conservative society all around the world. In terms of Russia in particular, we've talked about this on other videos, about the importance of what the Putin government is calling spiritual security. Julie Elkner's research has been very, very informative in this area. She talks about the notion of spiritual security developing in Russian domestic and international policies under the Putin government, which have been designed as a primary measure by which traditional Russian values, embodied particularly in the Russian Orthodox Church, can be protected and perpetuated in the midst of globalized assaults. Russia seems to fully recognize that globalization involves radically re-traditionalizing forces that disembed time and space away from localized and customary interpretation and control and re-embeds them in transnational consumer-based interpretation. So localized time is replaced by standardized time, localized business is replaced by transnational corporations, and localized customs are replaced by translocal consumerism. And so the Russian policy of spiritual security is taking very, very seriously the secular detraditionalizing forces of globalization. So in 2000, a document entitled The National Security Concept of Russia stated that the assurance of the Russian Federation's national security included protecting the nation's cultural, spiritual, and moral legacy and the historical traditions and standards of public life. There has to be a state policy that maintains the population's spiritual and moral welfare, as well as counter the adverse impact of any organization seeking to undermine that spiritual and moral welfare. And so Elkner's research has observed that Putin's drawn a very tight connection between religion, culture, and nationality. Again, a pattern that we're seeing emerging in many other nations throughout Europe, like Poland, Hungary, Georgia, as well as the wider world, such as India, Turkey, and the larger Middle East. Remember, in the Pacific, the islands of Samoa recently declared themselves to be an officially Christian nation, dedicating their nation explicitly to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in their efforts to counter the secularizing dynamics of globalization. This is what is known as retraditionalization. It's integral to the formation of a new conservative age that redefines the political order around nationalism, populism, and traditionalism. Now, while the idea of a military church may come across to some of us here in the Western world as a bit odd, it actually fits quite comfortably within the history of the church in both East and West. It's unfortunately rather fashionable among our contemporary Western elite to rebrand the church as little more than a historic antecedent of the 1960s pacifist hippie communes dedicated to placing flowers in the tips of the pointed rifles of military police. But when it comes to the reemergence of Christian civilization that we're seeing going on in our time, this hippie-inspired pacifism is being replaced with a far more historically informed conception of the Christian church, which for over 1,000 years provided the moral reflection of what precisely constituted a just war, a just military action. For those interested, I would recommend a book by Alexander Webster and Darrell Cole entitled The Virtue of War for an extended study on this issue. They amass an impressive array of original sources that demonstrate the church's involvement in redeeming what constitutes just military action. So, for example, while there were certainly pockets of pacifism here or there within the diverse Christian communities throughout the Mediterranean, the earliest evidence that we see concurs that Christians did in fact serve in the Roman military in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. One of the first confirmations comes from the year 173 AD, where we see Christians as part of a military campaign along the Danube under Emperor Marcus Aurelius. There are a number of military gravestones of Christian soldiers from the same time period. And there are several accounts of martyrs among Diocletian's persecutions. They were victims of active attempts to purge the Roman army of any trace of Christians. By the time of Constantine in the early 4th century, there's what we might say a civic reflection on the nature of the Christian faith, which included not merely the invocation of God's blessing on the empire, but also his blessing on its military campaigns. Liturgies were conducted before battles, blessing soldiers and their weapons, prayers for protection in combat. Indeed, it's the argument of Alexander Webster and Darrell Cole that there is a significant consensus among the church fathers that war waged on behalf of the peace of God's kingdom is in fact a positive good, a work of virtue, and indeed an act of charity. The church has consistently affirmed that it is the responsibility of every able-bodied Christian to protect the weak and the elderly and the infirm. This was indeed considered the epitome of virtue and courage, while its opposite, a sort of pacifist surrender and indeed enabling of harm coming to those who otherwise cannot defend themselves, that kind of pacifist approach was considered the epitome of cowardice and indeed disgrace. So all this is to say that Russia's military church is in many respects a monument to resurgent Christian civilization in our time. If I told you back, say, 1980, well, I would have been a very prescient 11-year-old back in 1980. But if someone said that during the height of the Brezhnev era, that in a matter of just a few decades, there would be a massive church built in Moscow celebrating and indeed encouraging the Christianization of its military, you would have thought that that person had gone insane. But it's happened. And it happened because we are indeed entering into a new conservative age that is only just beginning. Christian civilization is rising in all kinds of exciting ways throughout the world, which promises the inevitable demise of secular globalism and the emergence of a new political order for generations to come. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our new online merchandise selection where you can get gear and apparel celebrating all things nationalist, populist, and traditionalist. And if you would, please click on our Patreon link below and become a monthly supporter of this channel. As you know, we are periodically demonetized by YouTube, and we could really use your help so we can continue to analyze current events in light of awesome conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.